Hello and welcome to a Game Week 10 Premier League preview. Apologies for missing last week, but I hope to be back to a sort of normal posting schedule. So before we start getting into the games, if you could just please, if you are here live, quickly confirm everything is working as expected and I will get underway. Everything working all good, guys? Okay, all seems to be working as expected. So, thank you all for tuning in live. Welcome to another live stream. Getting stuck back into the Premier League after sort of busy EFL midweek. For those that do follow me as well on Twitter, you would have seen that overnight we landed a clean sweep in the NBA, 8-0. So, very excited to share our bets here. Hopefully, we can sort of see similar results. So, as I say, thank you for tuning in live. If you are here, I would invite you all to leave your bets in the chat, or if you're watching it as a video, leave your bets in the comment section, and I'll be more than happy to go through them. So, without wasting any more time, first game to cover is Newcastle against Arsenal, 12:30 early kickoff at St James's Park. Newcastle have been in poor league form after a fantastic start to the season. They are winless in the last 5 league games. However, they did beat Chelsea 2-0 in the EFL Cup midweek, so got a bit of revenge after their weekend result. It's worth noting that they did go for a sort of stronger 11, whereas Chelsea opted for a bit more rotation. Arsenal also won midweek, 3-0 to Preston, and they'll be looking to sort of bounce back to winning ways in the Premier League, having been pegged back twice against Liverpool to draw 2 each. And before that, they lost 2-0 to Bournemouth, obviously, with Saliba getting sent off. So they'll be looking for a bit of a bounce back. In terms of the injury report, obviously, Saliba will now be able to feature for this one. He served his 1-game suspension against Liverpool. His centre-back partner, however, Gabriel, is ruled out. So a bit of an uncertainty in that respect. But I would imagine it's Kirill who deputises alongside him, as he did against Preston. Calafiori remains out, as does Odegaard. So we can expect to see sort of Saka, Havertz, Trossard, and Declan Rice reintroduced to the lineup after being rested midweek. For Newcastle, Anthony Gordon shook off doubts of an injury to feature against Chelsea, so he should be in line to start. Bruno Guimaraes was also afforded a rest in that game, so should be good to go as well. Not too much news in terms of the injury report for Eddie Howe to contend with, so we can expect a sort of similar lineup we've seen so far this season. Don't think Gab has been ruled out. He nearly made this one for something. From what I've seen, I think it's very unlikely he starts. As I say, with Arteta, he's usually quite vague with his lineup. So, I would say maybe he isn't 100% ruled out of this game. If he does start, sort of, we'll have to make adjustments to how we sort of approach the game. But for now, I've assumed he is out. One of the selections that I will cover is in regards to that, so we can sort of consider what to do in that scenario. But I'll touch back on that later. So thank you for bringing that one up. But it is an early kickoff, 12:30. And I do think it's a bit of a banana skin fixture. We have to be a bit wary with how we sort of approach this. When you consider how teams have approached games so far, we would say they're both sort of content with sitting back. They're both content off the ball, which means I think the overall play is quite game state dependent. I think obviously Arsenal will be the ones pressing for the win, and Newcastle, I don't think a draw would be a bad result for them, but given their poor form and the fact that they're at home, I think they'll be sort of very front-footed in their approach. So I think whoever gets the first goal of the game, it can really dictate how the game is played out later on. So when you have those kind of games, they're a bit harder to approach. So we do have to be wary. I think we can gain a lot of valuable information looking into the last head-to-head between these two. It was quite a feisty affair. We saw a lot of first-half cards, sort of a lot of tension being built up, especially through sort of tough challenges from Havertz. So I think duels actually are the way to go for this one. They're the sort of angle in for me. And starting off, the sort of price that catches my eye the most is Joe Linton to commit 2 or more fouls, which is priced at 1.66 with Sky, their top price. But you can boost that by doubling it with one of the Arsenal players to draw a foul. So I've gone for Saka to draw a foul, which boosts the odds to 1.83, which I think looks a really, really nice price. When you consider how Joe Linton plays, he's obviously quite physical in his approach, and whenever you get games like this where it's a big game at home, you sort of see him play with a bit more intensity in midfield. I think we can draw a lot of parallels between this game and the Man City game earlier this season, which was also an early kickoff. So in that game, Joe Linton committed 3 fouls, which was his most for the season, other than Spurs. He was also carded, got in a lot of duels, really, really put himself about. And yeah, as I say, 12:30 kickoff at home to a big club. So quite similar to this game against Arsenal. Joe Linton has made a foul in every game so far this season. If we look into the sort of more relevant fixtures, he's got 5 fouls, yellow carded against Spurs at home, 3 fouls, yellow carded against City at home, and then 2 fouls against Chelsea in the EFL Cup. So in those sort of, as I mentioned, the home games against bigger clubs, against top 6 clubs where Newcastle are perhaps the underdogs, we do see him play with that bit more aggression, potentially sort of driven on by the home crowd. So really like his sort of foul prices, 1.66. Slightly too short for a single, but can easily back it with a sort of correlated stat to boost the odds. Going with a similar angle, Bruno Guimaraes has also seen a pretty sizable uptick in fouls when playing at home against a big club. Similarly, if you look against his game against Spurs, 3 fouls, yellow carded, and against City, 3 fouls, yellow carded. So he's another player to target because Newcastle will be intense in their press. They'll be front-footed in their approach, at least to start the game, I would imagine. And we saw Bruno Guimaraes against City earlier this season, made a foul after about 2 minutes. So he's sort of a more emotional player, will be quite fired up, will be ready for this game, and therefore I see him as a good player to target in addition to Joe Linton. He's actually priced at 2.0 to commit 2 fouls with Paddy Power, who are best price. Sky Bet are not too far behind, they're at 1.91. So I think both of those prices look really, really nice on the surface. Also, considering that sort of both players have been carded, will work carded against City, I do think it's a very, very similar game. So I'm looking at those two to get carded again. In the head-to-head last game between these two, or last season between these two, Bruno Guimaraes made 2 fouls and was carded. Joe Linton did manage to escape a card, but he did make 2 fouls. So again, really like those two, and I think there is long shot potential with the double. So if you double 2 fouls each for Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes, that comes out at 3.4 with Sky, which I think is really nice. And the card double comes out to 8-1 with Sky also. So I think there is a long shot potential for those two. Data looks fantastic. I think in terms of their approach, I think they'll be really, really aggressive and front-footed in this game. I think the only concern would be it's an early kickoff, but we did see against City, even despite that they were very, very sort of front-footed, they were eager to press and sort of willing to duel in midfield. That the sort of timing of the game didn't really affect how they played. Again, I think it's a difficult game to predict, but if we sort of look at how Newcastle started the game at City, they were it was a very chaotic start. Um, it was Newcastle sort of trying to take advantage of the home crowd before Man City can fully settle. They were quite intent on their press to start off with before sort of settling down a bit into more of a low block. But it was the first 10 minutes that were really chaotic. And in that 10 minutes, we saw quite a lot of duels. I think we saw one City free kick and one City corner. So I think that is a sort of alternative angle for this one. If we look at the sort of first 10-minute stats, I've decided to go sort of quite safe for now and go with a double of over 0.5 corners for both teams and over 1.5 free kicks for both teams in the first 10 minutes. And that comes out at 2.04, which I do think is a really nice price actually when we consider how sort of feisty the affair was between these two sides last season. I think sort of stats in the first half, stats in the first minute, the odds are a lot more sort of backable than if you look at the whole game. And I do think there is certainly ladder potential there. If you were to go for Arsenal to receive a corner in the first 10 minutes, that would be 2.37. And I think odds against for that sort of selection is a pretty nice price. To go back to Saliba, one of the sort of main things I like about Saliba this season is obviously the fact that he's been a bit more aggressive in his centre-back partnership with Gabriel. And that's led to an uptick in tackles, which sort of books have been quite slow to adjust to. So we've seen him make at least 2 tackles in 8 out of 12 games so far this season in all competitions. But it's worth noting that those came in each of the first 8 games of the season. So he's actually blanked in the last 4 straight games. And I think that is something to look into a bit. So he's priced at 1.83 for 2 tackles, which on the surface, given that's landed in 8 out of 12 games, looks a good value selection. But when we interrogate the data a bit more, we see in the last 4 games it's obviously failed to land. One of those being against Bournemouth, where he was sent off after 30 minutes, already on 1 tackle. So I think it's fair to us to ignore that game for now. So if we focus on the 3 games where he blanked, that's against Preston away, Shakhtar at home, and Southampton at home. 3 games where Arsenal were totally dominant, where they didn't really allow their opposition to sort of progress very much, and therefore Saliba was sort of not very involved on the defensive front. Against Preston, for example, you can see Arsenal had 74% possession, and Saliba actually was in 0 ground duels, so wouldn't even be close to this. Against Newcastle, it's a completely different game. I think it'll be a lot more evenly contested. The market is sort of favouring a more even game, and therefore, by extension, I think Saliba will be in a lot more duels, and it'll be sort of more similar to his opening fixtures of the season. He's averaging 2.5 tackles per game in all competitions, which is a massive uptick from last season, and 1.83 is a nice price based on that. The next thing to actually consider is who he plays alongside with. So, obviously, assuming Gabriel is out, there's quite a lot of uncertainty in regards to how he plays alongside Kyrgios. Preston was not a good game to sort of look into that. It's sort of uncertain who will be the more aggressive in the partnership. But I'd actually, if Kyrgios was to start, I'd probably lean towards Kyrgios being the more aggressive player, just because he has sort of experience at fullback, whereas Saliba doesn't. He just plays as a centre back. However, if Gabriel is to start, Saliba will be the more aggressive player against the likes of Isak, Anthony Gordon, so he draws a good matchup in that sense. And therefore, I really like his tackle prices again. So I think it's one to keep an eye on for lineups. But if Kyrgios is to start, probably an avoid. Just sort of keep an eye on who is the more aggressive in the partnership to see how to approach that bet going forward. But if Gabriel starts, I think it looks a pretty solid bet. For now, though, that's just a lean. Wouldn't imagine it drops in price. I think for these kind of games where it's 2 big teams, you don't get too many significant price movements. So happy to just sort of wait for lineups on that one before taking. That's all for the Arsenal Newcastle early kickoff. Quite a few angles for that one, despite it being quite a tough fixture to navigate. Second game is the second televised game on Saturday, Wolves against Crystal Palace, 5:30 kickoff at Molineux. We are going to ignore the 3 o'clock kickoffs in this stream, but I do like quite a few of the fixtures there, so I'll probably be covering those on Twitter, so make sure you are following me if you're not already. No midweek game for Wolves, so they've had the sort of advantage in that sense that they've had longer prep time for this game. But they are still searching for their first league win. They currently have the record of 2 draws, 7 losses in their 9 games so far. But in their last game against Brighton, they did secure a draw with a pretty nice comeback in the sort of dying embers of the game. So they'll be hoping that can sort of buoy them to their first victory of the season. Palace are another struggling team in 17th, but they have sort of come into a bit of form of late. They secured their first league win against Spurs in the last league game, and they also beat Aston Villa midweek. So even though they did play a strong team and Villa rotated, they'll sort of find confidence from the fact that they seem to be coming under sort of a better patch of form under Oliver Glasner. The injury report is quite interesting for Palace though, because Eze was substituted after just 18 minutes with an apparent hamstring injury. Too early to say, but it would probably be logical to assume he misses this game on the weekend. I think it would just come too soon for him. Adam Wharton was also withdrawn before half-time, which again, not ideal, and you would assume based on that, he misses the game on the weekend. When you also consider Lerma is out, Palace are looking a bit light in midfield, and that's sort of something that we can look to take advantage of, because there is value because of that. For Wolves, the biggest name on the injury list is Mario Lemina, who's currently 50-50 to play this game with an apparent calf injury. Would imagine that the Wolves skipper starts here though. I think it's not a major injury, and if he has a chance of playing, Gary O'Neill will probably play him because of how important he is to the 11. So based on that, I would imagine we see quite a similar 11 for Wolves as the team that played against Brighton. Is Eze playing in that game? I would imagine not. I've actually assumed he's not, but again, we do need to wait for a bit more information in regards to injuries. When you see this kind of thing, where a player subbed off, it's really difficult to say whether they will play or not. What I will say is though, Glasner has sort of shown himself to be a manager who doesn't rotate very much. So I do think if there's a chance Eze is fit to play, I think he will start. But I do assume he doesn't start. So for this game, I've just got a couple of sort of miscellaneous angles. First one is taking advantage of the injuries for Palace, and it is for Will Hughes to make 2 or more fouls at 2.25 with Sky. Can't forget how important Mateta is. Yeah, Mateta, which I will talk about more in a second. I think he is sort of coming into a bit of form now. He started this in really poorly, and I think he actually needed to sort of be dropped. I think that sort of woke him up a bit, and he's a bit more confident since getting his goal. We'll talk about him in a sec though. So first angle, Will Hughes 2 or more fouls at 2.25 with Sky. As I say, Palace are likely going to be without Lerma, Wharton and Eze, which means we will see Kamada sort of shift into a more advanced inside forward role, and Hughes into midfield. Hughes played the full 90 against Villa midweek, which was the first time he did so all season, and he could be needed again with Palace looking light. If we look into his foul stats, this season has been sort of quite notable. He's averaging 2.6 fouls per 90, rising to 3.13 fouls per 90 when filtering to away games. He's landed at least 2 fouls in all 3 of his Premier League starts. So he's the sort of player who presses quite intensely. He's not known for sort of cynical fouls, but I think you'll find ample duels in the midfield against the likes of Matheus Cunha, against João Gomez for Wolves in midfield. I mentioned before how Wolves are quite a good target for opposition fouls because they sort of rely on progression through dribbling as opposed to playing long balls. We sort of see fullbacks like Semedo, Ait Nouri often sort of drive into midfield, and I think it brings the opposition holding midfielders into quite a lot of sort of action defensively. And because of that, really like targeting Wolves' opposition sort of midfielders to make fouls. And Will Hughes, obviously, if he has to play the 90, it's an ideal matchup for him, in my opinion. So 2.25 to make 2 fouls looks a pretty big price with Sky. They are top price. And I do think there is a lot of potential there to 3 or potentially with adding a card. Second bet is for Nketiah to have 2 shots and a shot on target. He's a sort of familiar face recently. Did think the ship has sailed for him as his sort of price shortened. However, the injury to Eze sort of brings in a new sort of dimensional aspect to consider with that. So what do I think if Eze is to sit out this game? How do I think that impacts Palace? First of all, I think it hinders Mateta. He's a sort of player who can't really create his own chances, relies on others creating for him. Obviously, Eze being the biggest creator, the biggest creative force in that Palace team, definitely think it sort of reduces his output. However, I do think it has a positive impact on Nketiah, as I would imagine he sort of slots straight into that Eze role, in a sense that he's more free as an inside forward, potentially even on free kicks. I think with Nketiah, he's a player who can create his own chances. He's sort of good off the dribble, and when given the sort of space and time, he's a good player to target 4 shots. He's sort of selfish in that sense. His shot data since arriving to Palace is quite notable, which I'll just bring up on screen. But he's a shoot first player, and if he's sort of in an inside forward position, looking to play at least 90 minutes or sort of at least 80 minutes, I think it's a fantastic opportunity to target him for shots, but that is only assuming Eze doesn't play. If we look into his shot data, he's averaging 2.73 shots per 90, landed a shot on target in 5 out of 7 starts. Interestingly, actually, he did blank against Aston Villa, and that was after Eze was taken off after just 18 minutes. But Villa away obviously is a much tougher matchup than Wolves away. And I think the sort of biggest takeaway from that game is the fact that he played 88 minutes. As I mentioned, Glasner isn't really one to rotate his side very much, and I do think Nketiah he's in for a more extended minutes run. If all of these sort of aforementioned players do sit out in this game, I think his sort of attacking role will be massively increased without Eze. So he's landed a shot on target and 2 shots in 4 out of 7 this season. Now he'll sort of have a much bigger role. Higher minutes is expected, and he draws a good matchup against Wolves. So really like his price of 1.83. With Unibet, who are top price, but Sky are not too far behind at 1.75. I think 365 are at 1.66 or 1.72, something along those lines. So again, not too far off. That's all I've got for Wolves against Palace. That will finish off the Saturday games. Moving on to Sunday, we have 2 games, starting off with Tottenham against Aston Villa. A 2 p.m. Sunday kickoff at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's been an inconsistent start for Ange Postecoglou, but they did manage to beat Man City midweek to progress in the EFL Cup. The visitors obviously did rotate quite heavily. They played a very young side, but Spurs won't care. They've progressed. They've picked up a big win, and they'll sort of be confident coming into this game, I would say. For Aston Villa, they were beaten obviously by Crystal Palace midweek, but they did make some significant changes to their starting 11 with most starters rested, which I think is important because they have had a much sort of busier fixture schedule than most sides. So I think that was due, and to see most starting players get a rest was important because we know how they will probably line up in this game. But Palace were full strength in that game, so I don't think it's a sort of massive surprise that Villa lost. The league is clearly the priority, as his side sit 4th behind Arsenal, Liverpool and Man City. So they've started the season really, really well. Should be confident again coming into this game. On to the injury report. Heung-min Son missed out midweek against City. He was at the stadium, but I think he was 50-50 in that game and should be ready to start against Aston Villa. I can really see him starting. Big news again, as Van der Ven was substituted against Man City with a hamstring injury, I believe. Again, impossible to say the severity of the injury based off him just coming off, but I would be very, very surprised if he starts on the weekend, which is a massive blow for Spurs. And it means Dragusin likely comes in to partner Romero. Meanwhile, for Aston Villa, they actually have 0 players on the injury report, so we can only assume that they will play their full strength 11 on the weekend, especially given how they rotated midweek. Spurs are a much poorer side without Van der Ven, so I'm sort of leaning towards actually backing Villa as the favourites for this game. I think it'll be quite a high scoring game, and the market seems to agree. Because of that, I think it's quite a difficult game to predict again. Aston Villa are a team who don't allow too many chances, but of the shots they do concede, they tend to be of a sort of high quality nature. And they also play a high line. So I think it could be quite a chaotic game. But I think we can sort of draw parallels with Spurs' approach with how they set up against Brighton. And obviously they lost that game, but especially in the first half, they were really potent. They caused Brighton a lot of problems. And against a similarly high Aston Villa line, I think they'll approach it in a similar way. So what they did in that game was Solanke sort of dropped into a sort of deeper role as a facilitator, similar to what we saw Roberto Firmino do for Liverpool a few seasons ago. And his sort of priority was to create chances for the wide players. So it was Werner and Brennan Johnson who were the main targets. In this game against Aston Villa, I would imagine Son and Brennan Johnson are the 2 players to target for sort of shots. However, as I mentioned, Villa don't allow too many chances, but they do allow quite high quality chances. So sort of looking at the markets of Brennan Johnson's shot on target and Heung-min Son's shot on target. Now, Brennan Johnson has obviously been a great target for shots already this season and goals. We obviously saw him go on that stellar run where he just seemed unstoppable every game he was scoring. And he's actually averaging the highest shots per 90 for Spurs this season. 3.69 shots per 90, which is ridiculously high. So my first angle is for Brennan Johnson to have a shot on target and 2 shots or more, which is priced at 1.73 with Paddy. Again, probably slightly short for a main line. So what you could do if you prefer longer sort of main lines, you could do over 0.5 shots on target for Brennan Johnson and over 2.5 shots, which is priced at 6-4 with Bet365, which again I think is really nice. But if we go to the first angle, the one with 2 shots, that has actually landed in 11 out of 14 games in all competitions this season, including against Arsenal, Newcastle, Man City, Man United and Brighton. So it's getting over this line even in tough matchups. I think the main sort of game on that list is the one against Brighton, where he had 3 shots, 1 on target, and he actually scored a goal in that game. He's had the 3 shots, 1 on target in 6 out of 14. Obviously a big drop off there, but as I say, matchup is ideal for him in this one, so wouldn't mind targeting the extra shot. On a similar line of thought, I do think Emi Martinez saves in big games is also a 1 to target. He's currently priced at 1.9 to make 4 saves with Bet365, which is probably a bit too short. I would have expected it to be a bit higher odds, but do think it's a nice price nevertheless. And for now, it's just a lean as opposed to like a definitive angle. Also for this game, obviously it's 2 high lines, so I think it could be quite sort of duel heavy, chaotic, and aggressive at times, especially in midfield. So the next angles I've got are in the fouls drawn markets, and there's a few players I like for a few different reasons. Kulusevski, obviously another player who I've backed a few weeks running. The price has shortened a lot since when I first backed him, but still think it's nice value, especially in this matchup. He should find duels against the likes of Tielemans, Amadou Onana in midfield. 2 good players to target for fouls. And since he has sort of shifted into that midfield role for Spurs, he's been fouled in pretty much every game. So it's a fantastic player to target. Did play, I think, the full 90 against City midweek, which means he might be subbed early, but I would doubt it. I think even if he is, we're covered with this one by taking it with Paddy Power. And that brings us on to the next selection, which is Morgan Rogers to draw a foul, which has landed in 10 out of 12 games so far. And again, he's another player who sees a lot of the ball in midfield. He's a strong carrier. He's good in duels, good in possession. And I think he'll be sort of relied upon by Aston Villa in this sort of game to sort of progress the ball and drag his team up the field. As we sort of saw him do against Man United. In these sort of bigger games where Aston Villa might sort of look and rely more on outlets, I think he's that perfect player for them. And I think against Man United, we saw him do the exact same thing. Sort of look to get on the ball, look to drag his team up the field, and he drew 2 fouls in that game, playing the full 90. Similarly, against Bayern, drew 2 fouls in that game. So the double of Kulusevski to draw a foul and Morgan Rogers to draw a foul comes out at 1.8 with Paddy Power, and we're covered with super subs. So I would advise taking it there. I believe they are top price anyway, but really like that one at 1.8. The next one and final bet I have for this game is a quite interesting angle, but it's for Udogie to draw 2 or more fouls, which is priced at 2.6 with Paddy Power. The same bet is 1.8 with Sky, which I would say even that is a bit big. But yeah, really liking this 2.6 price. I think it's one of the best value singles of the weekend. Udogie has drawn 2 or more fouls in each of his last 5 starts. Last time out in the Premier League, he drew 5 fouls against Crystal Palace. So he's a good player to target for fouls drawn. And I think this price is unusually poor. He draws a good matchup here against John McGinn or Matty Cash, sort of both of them. And yeah, again, based off the data, you wouldn't expect this to be so far odds against. He's averaging 1.91 fouls drawn per 90. Only Maddison is averaging more for Spurs. And it is a good matchup. Looking into the head-to-head games between Aston Villa and Tottenham last season, Udogie drew exactly 2 fouls in both of those. So landed in both head-to-head games last season. It has landed in each of the last 5 games. So I don't see why it's 2.6. I'm happy to take the value here. And again, expecting a sort of more chaotic game, battle of the high lines. We could see quite a few duels in midfield. And Udogie is a player who sort of likes to get on the ball, likes to invert, and goes down quite easily when he feels contact. So a good player to target for fouls drawn. 2.6 just looks a bit too big. The next Sunday game is Man United against Chelsea. 4:30 kickoff at Old Trafford. Of course, big news surrounding Man United as Ten Hag was sacked after the loss to West Ham, with Van Nistelrooy sort of assuming managerial responsibilities on an interim basis. He did get the new manager bounce, as expected, as Man United stormed to a 5-2 victory midweek over Leicester, with Bruno Fernandes and Casemiro the star performers with respective braces. It adds a layer of complexity to betting for this one. Obviously, when there is a new manager, especially an interim manager, it's sort of difficult to predict how they set up, sort of what changes will be implemented. So this is probably, even though it's the biggest game of the weekend, it's also probably the biggest banana skin fixture. So one to keep an eye on and be wary of. For Chelsea, we obviously saw Enzo Maresca rotate to his sort of familiar Cup 11. And they were beaten 2-0 at St James's Park by a pretty much full strength Newcastle side. So nothing really unexpected there. On the injury report, we have quite a lot of injuries to contend with for Man United, who will be without the likes of Kobbie Mainoo, Luke Shaw still, who's out, and Harry Maguire. Nasser Mazraoui was a doubt midweek after being taken off at West Ham, but he did appear off the bench against Leicester. So I would imagine we see a sort of familiar starting 11 for Man United that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Chelsea are another team with a small injury list, with Sancho the only sort of notable absentee. So we should see Neto come in to replace Modric. But again, we had a lot of the starters afforded a rest midweek, so they have the advantage in that sense of a longer preparation time. Both teams are extremely evenly matched. They're both actually priced identically at 2.6 to win with Bet365, which makes it so difficult to approach this game. For now, all of the angles I've got are just leans. It does need a bit of a deeper look, a deeper dive into this game. And as I say, it's one to be wary of. So the first lean I have is based on Cole Palmer, who actually scored in both games against Man United last season. He had 9 shots at Stamford Bridge with 5 on target and scored a hat-trick. So he'll probably be the one most looking forward to this game. He's currently priced at 6-4 for anytime goal scorer with William Hill. But I'd probably be leaning towards a sort of over 3.5 shots type of angle, which is priced at 2.1 with Bet365. Garnacho was another player who impressed in the previous head-to-head, as he netted a brace. In that game, he had 4 shots, 2 on target, and 2 goals, obviously, at Stamford Bridge. And in the reverse fixture, he had 8 shots with 1 on target. So, again, he's one to sort of keep an eye on for this one. If we look into his data for this season, he's actually averaging the most shots per 90 for Man United. He's averaging 4.38 shots per 90, and it's some pretty ridiculous data. Scored in the last game against Leicester, so which is always a good sign. Should be full of confidence. And you can actually get Garnacho to have a shot on target and 2 shots at 1.72 with Bet365, which looks a pretty nice price. I think Chelsea are obviously a bit more resolute defensively than they were last season. Maresca, I think, deserves a bit of credit for how he's come in, dealt with a sort of very inflated, very bloated squad, narrowed it down to his best 11, and they have been performing relatively well. But with that in mind, I do think Man United at home should be really, really confident of pushing on for a victory here. Another potential angle actually is for Lisandro Martinez to make 2 or more tackles, which is priced at 1.72 with Bet365. It looks a nice price because it's landed in each of the last 4 games for him. The only concern would be he's sort of a bit of a hothead, overly aggressive in his play, and you wouldn't sort of put it past him getting an early yellow. But with that in mind, he's averaging 2.04 tackles per 90 this season. And he draws a good matchup against Chelsea, I would say. He'll sort of contest duels with Nicholas Jackson, potentially even Cole Palmer. And with the way Martinez plays, he's very, very aggressive in his sort of approach. He often finds himself a bit isolated in transition, as Man United aren't sort of as adept at defending midfield spaces. So I think he is one to target for fouls. 1.72 is top price with 365. Looks a nice one. But yeah, as I say, be wary with this game. The data always becomes a bit redundant when you have these sort of managerial changes, and I would say it's already a bit of a trap fixture even before that, so wouldn't force anything. What I will be doing is a proper write-up on this game at some point on Twitter. So again, if you're not following me there, make sure you are. Have a ton of content planned for this week on the Premier League mostly, but also on a few La Liga games. So make sure you are following me and tuned in there. Final game of the game week is Monday Night Football, Fulham against Brentford. 8 p.m. kickoff at Craven Cottage. Fulham currently sit in 10th with a mid-table record of 3 wins, 3 draws, 3 losses, but they are winless in the last 3. So they were most recently held to a draw by Everton at Goodison Park, but they've had no EFL Cup midweek game, so would be well rested for this one. Brentford, however, were in action on Tuesday night as they secured progression in the Cup by virtue of a penalty shootout against Sheffield Wednesday. They actually went with a relatively strong 11. Brian Mbeumo started leading the line, but goals have been a real target for the Bees so far. In the last 4, there's been scorelines of 4-3, 2-1, 5-3 and 3-1 in the Premier League. So they've been one of the more enterprising, attack-minded teams in the league so far, and I would hope that sort of persists, that trend. Onto the injury report, Sasha Lukic remains out for Fulham with a shoulder injury. Joachim Andersen is suspended, and Andreas Pereira is 50-50 after picking up a knock in his last game. So we can sort of expect some changes for Fulham. They won't be able to field their strongest 11. And again, more on that in a little bit. For Brentford, Rico Henry and Aaron Hickey remain out, which means Sepp van den Berg could be sort of in line to start at left back again if Christopher Ayer is still injured. I imagine we see a sort of similar lineup to that which started against Ipswich, with Norgard returning to the starting 11. But as I say, it's a final game of the game week, Monday night, so we're still sort of quite a long time away from that. I think we'll see prices shift, we'll see more markets emerge. And because of that, this sort of section is more just early ideas, potential angles, as opposed to locks. Firstly, I think the game will be quite high scoring, and the market does seem to sort of agree with that. Over 2.5 goals is priced at 1.66, but a sort of alternative angle to that is going for both teams to score and over 2.5 goals, which is priced at 1.9. Now, when you look into Brentford's last games, they've obviously seen both teams to score in each of their last 9 games, and both teams scored over 2.5 goals in 7 of those. So I do think both teams get on the score sheet here with how Brentford play. They're very attack-minded, but they are extremely poor defensively. They're very, very leaky, and that's something that Fulham will be looking to take advantage of. I don't see Fulham blanking at home, but I also don't see Brentford blanking because of how potent they are attacking wise. They just have players in great form, and even though this game finished 0-0 last season, I just don't envision that happening again with how Brentford have approached things. Speaking of a player in form, Bryan Mbeumo has sort of unsurprisingly the highest shots per game for Brentford so far this season in the absence of Ivan Toney. He scored a brace last time out against Ipswich, so should again be full of confidence as that took him to 5 goals in his last 5 games in the Premier League. So he's been a player in incredible form for Brentford, really, really leading the line as a talisman in the absence of Ivan Toney. And one of the sort of most surprising prices I've seen so far is he is 1.8 for a shot on target, which really, really stands out given that it's landed in 7 out of 10 games this season. And the 3 failures were Liverpool at Anfield, Man City at the Etihad, and Man United at Old Trafford. So Fulham don't really sit in that category. 3 tough away fixtures. So 1.8 looks a really, really nice price. I think Unibet are unsurprisingly top price, but that's only at 1.83. So not a sort of significant discrepancy to take advantage of. And I think 365 are nicely priced at 1.8 here. I would imagine a fairer price would be closer to sort of 1.5. So would take advantage of that. And I would hope it doesn't shorten. Again, just a massive roll up front for Brentford will be the target, potentially on set pieces as well. So really like his shot on target, so odds at 1.8. Another player to keep an eye on is Harrison Reed. He could be in line for his first league start of the season, with Pereira obviously picking up a knock. I would imagine the natural replacement is Harrison Reed. And looking into his foul data, he's actually got a stellar record. He's only started 2 games this season, one being against Birmingham in the EFL Cup, in which he made 3 fouls and was booked, and the other being against Preston, in which he made 0 fouls. But other than that, he sort of played for less than 10 minutes in every game per season off the bench. Against Newcastle, though, he featured for 23 minutes, which was his sort of most minutes of the season, and in that time he made 3 fouls and was booked. So he's a player who, in a similar way to Will Hughes, very aggressive in his press. He sort of puts himself about, very willing to duel. And because of that, he's a good target for fouls. Obviously, this sort of player stats is off his last 30 games. He's averaging 2.82 fouls per 90, which is a ridiculous total. Obviously, a lot of those are off the bench, but if he does get his first start, he'll be a bit rusty. Hasn't started in the last 4. And Brentford aren't really an ideal matchup for drawing fouls. But I just think his price at... he isn't priced yet. But if we can get him for sort of odds against or something like that, looks a really, really nice one, given how given how good his foul data is, really. And also Sander Berger is sort of less intense in his press, not a really adequate replacement for Sasha Lukic. So we'll sort of see. I would imagine Harrison Reed take up the sort of bigger burden for putting himself about, getting into tackles, and making fouls. So those are three early shouts for Fulham against Brentford. We've got both teams scoring over 2.5 at 1.9, and Bournemouth to have a shot on target at 1.8, and Harrison Reed to make 2 or more fouls, which is yet to be priced. So, again, this sort of game warrants a more in-depth thread whenever more markets are out, and that is one that I'm looking forward to posting. So, again, make sure you follow me on Twitter. That'll be a good one, I hope. But that is all. That is all the angles for the stream. Thank you all for tuning in live. Thank you all for your questions in the chat. Thank you very much for supporting. Remember to stay tuned on Twitter. I'll be posting full write-ups of pretty much all the games this weekend, and I'll have my staking plan in the Telegram channel. NBA bets today, smaller slate, but I would hope to get a few out. Once again, thank you for supporting, and I will see you all next Thursday. So take care and have a great day.